Live from the mist-enshrouded mountaintop fortress that is X and Y Communications headquarters, you're listening to the world-famous Mountaintop Podcast. And now, here's your host, Scott McKay.
What is going on, gentlemen? This is your main man, Scott McKay, at Scott McKay on Twitter, Scott McKay on YouTube, Real Scott McKay on Instagram. And as always, the Facebook group is the Mountaintop Summit, and you can find us at www.mountaintoppodcast.com. Thrilled to be with you guys again today. We got a returning guest, a good friend of mine. We've hung out in person on occasion, and he's just an all-around good dude with a lot to offer. And his name is Derek Loudermilk, who is the author of a book called Superconductors. He's also a very talented business coach, currently residing with his beautiful family in Portugal. Derek, welcome, man.
Scott, I'm excited to hang out with you again.
Yeah, man. I wish it were in person. I wish I was in Portugal with you guys.
Yeah. Have you been to Portugal? I'm sure that you have, actually.
On 2 different occasions, actually.
Well,
haven't been out to the Azores yet, though, which I want to do.
Those look pretty amazing. Instagram tells me so.
So you guys are on the mainland. You guys are on the Iberian Peninsula, as it were.
We are. We're actually in a tiny little village. A friend of mine just happens to have a house here. I posted, "Hey, I'm going to Portugal," and she said, "I've got a house. It's available." And I find myself in this tiny little village.
So what's the coolest thing about living in a Portuguese village? Or are there too many to list?
One thing that I really appreciate is that I can, one block away from me is the farm fields, and I can go for a jog through these little dirt roads. It's very bucolic. It's sort of this romantic, it's almost like Ireland here, but a little bit sunnier. And I don't know, I just appreciate seeing that there's agriculture going on. I like the cycles of the planting season, and whenever I live in cities, I'm sort of disengaged from that. I just go to the grocery and there's my food. And so it's nice to be reminded that there's things growing and nature, ecology, and things like that.
Yeah. You know what? One of the nicest things about staying in another country in one place for at least a little while is you get to know the people around and you get to kind of get into the flow of their lifestyle. It's wonderful. It's different.
Yeah, there's these 10 old guys that sit outside the bakery every Saturday morning, and I ride my bicycle around and I pass by the same spot, and they're all sitting out there with their hats and their canes, and I wave to them. And now it's been, 8 weeks in a row where I've seen them, and finally I stopped and chatted with them. And it's just cool to see, like, okay, here's the Saturday morning old boys club hanging out in some other little village.
Yeah, even there in Portugal, like the rest of the world. Well, I'll tell you what, you have a gorgeous wife named Heidi, who you met overseas in Bali, if I recall. And you have 2 of the cutest sons I have ever seen in my entire life. I mean, congratulate Heidi for me, because she makes cute kids with you. That's a good thing. And I'll tell you what. If you guys ever follow Derek on Instagram, just realize that his kids are spectacularly cute and get yourself ready for that. But, to what we're talking about today, you've written a book that is just spectacular, and every guy should pick up a copy of it. And it's called Superconductors. And I love the premise of it. And the premise of it is what's going to guide our discussion today, which is, appropriately enough, on how not to become obsolete as a man, how to retain your value as you mature and as time passes. And this has a hint of futurism to it, which I love talking about. And the premise of your book is enumerating the skills that a man's going to need to have going forward as technology marches on and as things change in this world. And I just think that's a fascinating premise for a book, and it's going to lead to wonderful conversation here, I'm sure. Derek, what inspired you to write a book like that?
Well, I was working as a lab technician in a microbiology lab. That was one of my first jobs out of college. And I, in about 2 weeks, mastered everything that I needed to learn to be efficient in the laboratory. And so the first thing I noticed that was kind of boring once I no longer had much to learn. Second, I realized that I could train someone else, even a high school student, to do what I was doing in just a couple of weeks. So all of a sudden I started to worry that even though I had a biology degree, that what I was doing wasn't very valuable and that I could easily be replaced by perhaps a robot or whoever. So I realized I wasn't in a very strong place career-wise. So besides, going back and getting more education, I started thinking about what can I do to become more valuable, and acquiring technical skills and other non-technical sort of personal skills is the answer that I came up with. And I started seeing this everywhere. Self-driving cars threaten to replace truck drivers. Automation threatens to replace factory workers, et cetera. There's so many careers and jobs where people may be replaced by artificial intelligence or this, that, and the other thing. So what can we do to continue to have employment if we want to try to keep earning money and do things that are fulfilling? So it started this, multi-year long process to find out what those most important skills were. And superconductors is basically the top 10 or so skills that I think you can combine to ensure that you'll be valuable no matter what the future holds in terms of the career marketplace.
Well, before we dive into that, which we most certainly will, I think it's worth commenting on that not only is the nature of the skills required to succeed in life changing, but the very nature of how we're defining certain industries is changing before our very eyes and at light speed. I mean, nowadays, for example, when I see a yellow taxi cab, I just shake my head and feel sorry for the guy driving it. I mean, Lyft and Uber have taken over. You have to have rocks in your head to get a cab if you don't have to. If you can get Lyft or Uber, you should. Same thing for Airbnb. I mean, 5-6 years ago, traveling the world, it was all about hostels and booking a hotel. Nowadays, when we take our kids around and even go to BMX nationals, we find an Airbnb and settle in and save money and have a stove and actually are in a normal neighborhood, and it's wonderful. This is absolutely changing how we think about things and our whole paradigm about entire business models. I mean, look at the petroleum companies. ExxonMobil was second on the Fortune 500 list this year, right behind Walmart, which is dominating, by the way. And, 50 years from now, what's the petroleum industry going to be? I mean, are they just going to sit around and go the way of Wang Computer? Or are they going to reinvent themselves with this new paradigm of how we power things going forward? Will we power things differently going forward? All these guys working out in the oil fields out in West Texas and elsewhere, of course, are they going to have a job in 15 to 20 years? Are they going to have to reinvent their careers completely? I mean, reinventing one's career completely is kind of a thing nowadays. You don't go to work for the company and retire with a gold watch at 65 years of age anymore anyway, right, Derek?
Yeah, and I think we're really not prepared to match the rate of technological change. Humans have been sort of adapting to their environment as the environment changes slowly throughout the centuries, but now everything is moving way faster than even the human scale. And so we're really not prepared, and there's really no way to be prepared for technology to advance so quickly. So we just sort of have to prepare ourselves as best we can for so many things to be changing around us. Part of that is actually just being aware that things are going to be changing and know that we're all going to be a little uncomfortable because there's going to be so many new things. But there's a lot of opportunity there if you can take advantage of Airbnb or Uber or whatever. Just like podcasting wasn't a thing decade and a half ago, there's so much blue ocean for people to sail into in terms of opportunity that it's a really exciting time to be alive also.
Yeah. I mean, if you're set in your ways nowadays, you're already a dinosaur. I mean, I'm laughing a little bit because as you're talking, I'm reminded of the times people have asked me, so McKay, did you major in dating coaching in college? And I'm like, yeah, right. That was still 15, 20 years away, buddy. The whole premise of it was, interestingly enough, what I did out of college was a lot like life coaching, but we didn't call it that. I think it's also interesting that you're talking about things we can't possibly be prepared for related to technology, because a lot of times what technology brings isn't exactly what we thought it would bring or even things we were asking for. I don't remember in 1990 thinking, man, I can't wait till the internet gets here. But nowadays, it's a running joke if you have a library card. Things that are coming along are surprising in some ways, and in other ways fully expected. I mean, we knew airbags were coming in cars 20 years ago. We know robots are coming and they're going to serve all kinds of purposes. But still, you turn on the news and you see that manufacturing jobs are up. And they're still trying to revive and redeem the coal mining industry. All of these things are still going on, but you have this feeling that the wind isn't exactly at your back when you're doing those things for a living. I tell you what, though, let's imagine you did have a crystal ball, Derek, and knowing that it's nearly impossible to predict with certainty what's going to happen, of course. I mean, it is flatly impossible to predict with certainty, right? But where do you think things are going in terms of what we need to be prepared for skill-wise? And then we'll go ahead and dive into some of the skills you think we should have. But I'd love to cover that question first.
Well, so there's actually an overarching meta skill, which is adaptability. That means you can fit in with wherever you find yourself. If on one hand, there's an apocalypse of some kind, you need to be able to survive. And on the other hand, right, if everyone gets extremely prosperous, then what are you going to do? So there's this huge range of adaptability to situations. And the underlying skill there is the ability to learn quickly. And that can be physical skills, the ability to do things with your body. And then there's mental skills, acquire new information and come up with new mental models. And so that process of learning quickly and then quickly mastering skills is going to be really important, I think.
And you know what? I think today's children, I mean, you've got young children, as do I. Today's young children, it's almost as if they were born with that. It's almost like our genetics have changed in preparation for that. It's amazing how quickly our kids can pick up things, especially technologically. And meanwhile, those of us who are, you know, their fathers or grandfathers, we're feeling a little bit like we're left in the lurch, you know. How do we acquire that skill of adaptability if we've never really been confronted with the need for it? I mean, how do you teach an old dog new tricks, Derek? That's the question.
Well, we all are learning things to different rates. You know, if you can't remember the last specific thing you went out to try to learn, you're probably still learning things if you've met a new group of people, or if you've just, you know, if you've got a new cell phone or a new app or something, like you're still learning, but it's not really in your conscious awareness. But once you bring the learning process back into your awareness and you start thinking, you know, what do I want to learn? How do I learn best? What's the process for continuing to progress? Because progression is a big part of it too, because we all sort of hit these plateaus. For example, with driving cars, we all just sort of like get good enough to get our car around without getting an accident. And we're not all race car drivers, even though we drive a lot. So if you want to, you know, get really good at something, you have to progress past plateaus. So it takes a little bit of thinking, what are the little bits of skill that I want to focus on to help me improve? How do I get coaching around something? How do I socialize this to do it with friends to make it more fun? Or how do I stretch myself by having some sort of contest or competition day? There's a whole range of things you can do to ensure that you keep learning and that you can progress quickly to get really good at something in a short amount of time.
I would think that the intimidation factor for a lot of people is a lot worse than the actual reality of saying, okay, look, I need to sit down. I need to figure this out. I mean, my father, if he's listening to this, sorry, Dad, but it's the truth, took from 1995 to the year 2000 to figure out there's a location bar in his browser on the internet. I mean, he was Googling websites to find them before he realized he could just type in www. Using the web at all was something that was confounding to my parents when the internet came out. And what I'm realizing is when the internet came out was 25 years ago. They were actually the same age I am now when they were discovering the internet. And I'm thinking to myself, my goodness, 25 years hence, in today's day and age, I would be absolutely steamrolled. I would be run over like a possum on an interstate highway if I couldn't adapt at all like that. I mean, I have to. So, I mean, even those of us who are one generation behind my parents, and I'm still, you know, technically I'm an old parent, so a generation and a half compared to our kids, right, ahead of them. For the record, I'm old enough to be my kid's grandfather, pretty much. So, even I'm finding that Emily and I are a lot more adaptive than my parents are. And meanwhile, our children are almost super heroic at it. Is this a thing, you think? Or am I making this up?
Well, yeah. It's a necessity. And the reason why our parents are maybe less adaptive is that it takes effort to be adaptable. It takes changing your own neurons, rewiring your brain, and it also takes energy and focus and all these things. So if you don't have to adapt, then it's actually easier just to settle into a routine and ease and comfort and all of those things. So biologically, we like to not have to adapt, but the reality is that we are going to need to be adaptable. And so if you can remember the last thing that you were a beginner at, and you know that it feels awkward or clumsy, or you're just out of your element when you're unfamiliar with something. And if you can get used to that feeling of what it feels like to be a beginner and have that be okay, and have the struggles of learning where you take 2 steps forwards and 1 step back, and you're like, oh man, I messed it up. And then the next day you're celebrating, yes, I figured it out. I see this with my kids all the time because they're forced to learn just to walk and talk and navigate their world. But if you can get used to that discomfort of being a beginner and not knowing everything right away, then you'll have a way better chance of succeeding, because we've all learned a ton of things. It's not something that we can't do. It's just that it can be uncomfortable, and you just have to embrace that challenge.
So, okay, fair enough. Let's say we've embraced this need for us to adapt. And by the way, guys, if you're listening to this and you're still trying to fight that, it's a losing battle. You're going to have to adapt. You're going to have to change. This is why the topic we're talking about today really matters. So go ahead, Derek, lay it on us, man. What are some of these skills that we are going to have going forward to stay relevant in the future world?
So these are largely skills that define us as humans. And because, for example, robots and artificial intelligence will be stronger than us or able to do certain things much faster than us, there's certain things that we're going to insist that humans still do. And these are things that involve caring about other people and human connection. And those include storytelling, having fun, and gamification, and how we build relationships with each other. Because still humans, every opportunity that you want in life is still attached to a certain person who can enable that for you. So thinking about how to optimize your humanness is really what we're going for here.
I think that's very intuitive. I mean, notwithstanding the amount of time it's going to take for them to create an algorithm for a robot to do even those things. I mean, in the near term, at least, I think, maybe I'm dreaming, but the next decade or decade and a half, 2 decades, robotics will be limited to things that aren't very emotive, like building cars, taking care of cleaning the house, things like that. I would dare say meaningless sex. I mean, they're making huge leaps and bounds in that before our very eyes. But, having an automaton be able to meaningfully connect with you and emote is really, I would say, hopefully far flung in the future. But I mean, there's been movies about that, which we've talked about in previous podcasts. But man, I think the world's going to be pretty scary when you can't tell the robots from the humans, unless there's some easy way to figure that out. But I would think once the singularity hits, those robots would have other ideas anyway. It's just going to be crazy out there someday. But anyway, Derek, go ahead and give us some of those skills we're going to have to develop.
Well, one that I've been thinking about a lot in the last couple of weeks is relationship building. And in the terms of networking, people say your net worth is in your network. And what that really means is that the things that you really want are connected to people. So if you want a romantic partner, or if you want a job, or if you want someone to invest in a company that you started, all of these things come from people. And it's about finding the people that have those things that you want. So there's lots of people out there with money they want to invest, and there's a lot of other people out there with companies that want money, and so it's just about finding the right connection between people. And what happens is that, again, just like with the car example, where we're okay hitting a plateau, in our relationships, we just take sort of what comes to us. So we're friends with our neighbors, the people we work with, the people at our church, etc. And we don't actually pick and choose that much who we really want to be having relationships with, So it might make sense to have some people that are way smarter than you, and people that are older and younger than you, and people that are of different cultures and people in different occupations so that you have this diverse network. So in case, I don't know, you get some rare form of cancer, you have quick access to someone that can give you advice. Or say you want to put an addition on your house. Well, wouldn't it be great if you had quick access to an architect and someone on the city zoning board so that it could be easy for you to do that? And it's important to sort of diversify and strengthen and build trust into these relationships before you actually need it, so that things can move quickly when you actually do want to make something happen.
Well, two things there come to mind. First of all, I think we have a vast ability with social media and the internet, et cetera, to build more relationships with a broader array of people than we ever could have previously. But I also think that nearly all of those relationships are much shallower than they ever have been. Take, for example, dating apps. Take, for example, how people interact with each other on Facebook. Okay, I've liked this person's post this week. I've reconfirmed my friendship. I've done my heavy lifting. Meanwhile, in the real world, people are losing the ability to relate. I mean, it is tangible. It's palpable out there. You talk to people and they just don't know how to talk to each other anymore. Men and women are meeting on apps, knowing nothing about each other, only having based the decision to even meet in real life on the superficial idea of a photo and whatever this person wrote. I mean, maybe they FaceTime with each other before they meet, whatever. But more and more people don't even talk on the phone anymore. I mean, I know people who flat out refuse to talk on the phone. If someone actually calls me on the phone who I know, it's not business related, I'm surprised. I have a few friends who actually still pick up the phone and call me, and I'm grateful for that. But talking on the phone is an anachronism. I was listening to the comedy station, Laugh USA, on Sirius XM the other day. And one of the comedians actually brought up this topic, and it made me laugh. He goes, yeah, phone is like a seldom used app on my smartphone. I just started laughing, because it's so true. People just text each other's brains out, and there's no real nonverbal communication going on there. So I love what you're saying about, hey, you want to stay relevant? Be that guy who actually knows how to communicate with people and relate to others as human beings. I think it's brilliant. And it's a sad commentary on the state of how technology has already corrupted our abilities as human beings to do what we're born to do, which is relate to each other, even at the sexual romantic level. Crazy, right?
Yeah, I mean, humans became the species that sort of run across the earth. We've really succeeded largely because we are good at being social, and we can cooperate as groups and tell stories to each other and cooperate and things like that. And so actually just being together with other people and relating authentically, and that's our main competitive advantage as a species. So let's double down on that. And so whenever you get the opportunity to go be somewhere in person with people, set it up. Here's an example. In Portugal here, I went to meet some people at a co-working space. And I only spent a few hours talking to these people, and they have been so helpful, from translating the language to offering me advice to helping me get on national TV and features in the newspaper and et cetera. That wouldn't have been possible without me going and meeting them in person and building a little bit of trust. What I did was I took a bunch of photos of their new co-working space and I sent them the photos, and they were really happy to have those. And so it was just this tiny little favor that I was probably going to do anyway, because I like taking photos, that kicked off the relationship in a good direction. And now we can keep going back and forth and doing nice little things for each other. Even if I'm not hanging out with them very often, we have a relationship that can be increased, using our online communication tools because of that strong in-person connection and then building trust right away.
Well, I tell you, I would imagine being a connector, a person who actively brings other people together, who introduces people to other people who can enrich their lives, would be one of your superconductor skills, no?
Yeah, absolutely. And there's a relatively new term of someone called a superconnector, which is slightly different than a superconductor. A superconductor is sort of the hub of their personal network. So they know a lot of people, but they also have influence with people. So if you have a bunch of superconnectors in your network, and these are people like journalists or event organizers or a local restaurant owner or a politician or people that come into contact with a lot of people and have a bunch of strong relationships, podcasts hosts like yourself probably would be a good example.
Maybe if I'm in a good mood today.
But so they can multiply your access to, second order relationships. If you have a lot of people with big networks, then you have a lot more chance for opportunity. And so looking for the people that are super connectors in your town or in your network can be a great place to start.
What are a couple more skills that guys really should fine tune or maybe even build from scratch in order to ensure their place as the future rolls on?
Well, let's talk about charisma and confidence. And charisma is how people perceive you in a lot of ways, understanding your nonverbal cues, your body language and your voice. And it's understanding how people see you. And that takes some self-awareness. And you can largely decide how you want to come across. You can decide if you want to come across as interesting or exciting or peaceful or any of these things. And you can learn to be the way that you want to be, but it takes some awareness around what are the signals, how does body language work, how does interpersonal interaction work. And again, we're back to the humanness. How do we decide if someone is friend or foe at the very basic part of it?
I would think of charisma kind of like as being charming in an influential way. People want more of you and they want to be more like you. Yeah,
absolutely. The ability to unify people around a project or a mission. Partly it's about whether they like you as a person and they want to follow you. And partly it's about the story that you tell. So storytelling is another important element. How do you tell something that's relatable that people can see themselves in your story? How do you talk about your own background and skills and history in a way that's compelling for other people to understand who you are? So charisma and storytelling are two of these skills that are really important when it comes to, getting a job or in the online dating world. For example, I don't have a ton of experience with that, but I assume that it would be relevant there too.
In my naive yet curmudgeonly mind, I can't imagine a world anytime soon where robots can recount their stories in great witty detail. I mean, I have to believe the zombie apocalypse is going to happen before we get anywhere close to that. I mean, God help us if robots start telling wonderful stories. Can you imagine robot stand-up comedy? I mean, they're going to be hilarious if that algorithm's written properly. It'll be amazing. Anyway.
Yeah, there are. So there are elements of stories and of comedy, of course, that you can turn to. And we're already trying to figure out, the patterns to try to make ourselves funnier or more entertaining. So yeah, maybe if they write a good algorithm, then we'll have funny robots.
How about integrity, character, honesty? How does that fit into being a superconductor? Because I really believe we're seeing a lot less focus on that in the world nowadays. Yet I think people still crave someone who actually has integrity and treats them right. Is this one of those hidden secrets to being marketable for the rest of your life, do you think? I mean, it's kind of a trick question. It's a loaded question, right? But, give me your thoughts on it nonetheless.
Well, it's not something that I covered explicitly in the book, but in relationships, for example, doing the thing that you say that you're going to do is going to be important to long-term connection. When you have a clear set of values or principles and you understand, how you're approaching whatever it is, dating or your career, and you can live based on those principles, here we are trying to make ourselves more like machines. But if you have, for example, the church used to give you your values and principles, and now it's sort of like just figure them out on your own, and we're all left to try to go and acquire some frame of reference for how we want to live our life. But if you do acquire those and you can live according to them based on what's important to you, then people will see that you're at least consistent. They don't necessarily have to have the same values to appreciate that you are living in according to your values.
That's something that comes up on this show a lot, that idea of how secularization in our culture has brought about a lot of blurred lines in terms of what ethics or integrity even means. I mean, the core value system that was brought about, as you said, by the church has now been replaced by whatever echo chamber you choose to associate with. And it's easy to believe that everybody in your echo chamber is right and everybody else is wrong. And what that's doing is it's creating a social climate where a bunch of people think they're right about something and don't even realize how wrong they're being perceived as by such a huge percentage of the population outside of the group they're hanging out with. I think you combine that with the simple reality that more and more people are communicating with each other and indeed allegedly relating to each other through this buffer zone of a computer screen. And people are just feeling like, hey, you know what? The anonymity of the internet is a beautiful thing, and I don't have to really have a whole lot of integrity anymore. I'm not dealing with a real human being. I'm dealing with words and text on a computer screen or on a smartphone, and it kind of helps people suspend their disbelief a little bit. They feel like they're not even dealing with a real human being anymore. So, you know what? Maybe I can let my ethics slip. I can let my honesty, my integrity slip. Let's see what I can get away with, because maybe this person on the other end isn't really human. Yeah, it happens even on dating sites, on dating apps. I mean, look how so many people just can't stand how widespread the concept of ghosting and flaking and breadcrumbing and all these crazy terms are in the online dating world, yet almost everybody will admit to doing it themselves. It's just nuts. So I really think you're onto something there. It's as if the person who can keep in mind that people really do crave honesty. People do almost find it refreshing nowadays when someone actually does what they said they're going to do, that's got to be a superconductor skill going forward, because even now people are losing that trait. They're losing that virtue at record speed. I mean, it's got to be frustrating to feel kind of like the last man standing who actually still has integrity, because, you know, people are going to be pantsing you all the time. But I do think that the guy with the integrity is the one who has the longevity in terms of career, in terms of long-term success. I mean, in my own niche, you know, I say this at great peril, the ground is littered with guys who are no longer working with guys on how to get better with women because there was no integrity behind what they were doing. You know, people are like, well, Scott, how can you have done this for 13 years? I mean, everybody else has moved on to something else. You know, people are saying that the whole niche is actually not a thing anymore, that men don't need to get better with women. And I say a pox on that, because we're always going to want to get better with the people we're trying to attract. That's recession proof. It's future proof. Hopefully it's future proof. My gosh, if the robots get that good, who knows? But like I said, hopefully that's at least a few years away. But I love what you're saying about this. And, you know, to kind of bring this whole conversation full circle, it's really about, like you said, retaining your humanity vis-a-vis everything getting so technical. And I think you're onto something else in terms of people becoming so involved personally with their technology that we're becoming a bit robotic ourselves. And if we start depending on our abilities to do robotic things and be robotic, hell, we're going to be replaced, because we're not going to be as good as what replaces us, because it's pure technology, it's technical skill. I think your book is a bellwether for where we are as a human race right now, and I think every guy should get their hands on it. Do you have any final thoughts that really are going to galvanize this whole idea in men's mind and say, hey, you know what, even if I'm still on the fence about this right now, this is a thing and I really need to think about it going forward? What are your final thoughts to guys?
Well, I think what's really something that we lose is that we are biological entities. We are large mammals. We're not sort of separate from the rest of the world. Even if we're living a lot of interactions in the online space, like we still have this physical body that gives us emotions. Also, we're wired for tribalism, like we're wired for this. So really understanding our biology and our needs in terms of keeps us motivated, what gives us energy, what helps us find connection, and also how we relate with the air we breathe and the ground we walk on and all these things, I think is really important because it's even easier than ever to forget that you're a human. So I would say just remember your biology.
Yeah, it's amazing that it's come to having to talk about that, isn't it? Remember you're human. But you're absolutely dead on right about it. I mean, you're just bang on accurate with that. Gentlemen, by now you figured out that what Derek's talking about here is pretty deep, heavy stuff. And the book is fantastic. I highly recommend it. It's called Superconductors. And to get your hands on it, I've, as always, arranged a special URL for you. And that's www.mountaintopodcast.com/super. SUPER, and you'll be able to get your hands on Derek's book and you'll enjoy the hell out of it. And, Derek, thank you so much, man. As always, it's just a pleasure to talk to you. You're a smart dude. You're a good dude. And I really think that this has been an incredibly intuitive conversation that needs to happen more often. And I'm sure the guys appreciated it. So thank you very much.
Yeah, Scott, thank you for having me.
And guys, if you haven't visited my Amazon influencer page yet, go to www.mountaintoppodcast.com/Amazon, and you'll be able to find Derek's book at the top of the page, Superconductors. And you'll also be able to grab a copy of the books written by other guests of the show. It's pretty cool. And as always, go to www.mountaintoppodcast.com, click the button on the middle of the page where you can arrange to talk to me for 25 minutes about what's on your mind. And if coaching is a good fit, we can either do laser coaching, which is something new we're doing for you guys who are busy, and or do a 10+ program, which is a complete plan of action for you. And until I talk to you again on the next episode of The Mountaintop, this is Scott McKay from X and Y Communications in San Antonio, Texas. Be good out there.
The Mountaintop Podcast is produced by X and Y Communications. All rights reserved worldwide. Be sure to visit www.mountaintoppodcast.com for show notes. And while you're there, sign up for the free X and Y Communications newsletter for men. This is Ed Roy Odom speaking for The Mountaintop Podcast.